Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video, March 27th.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Business taxes. Was stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I am one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup, and I'm here with my other host.
That would be me, Shelby or Shecup.
And I interrupted her right before she was going to talk, and she looked real silly.
I just wasn't expecting you to introduce me differently.
Yeah, but we're here to talk about some Dragon Age. We're talking about probably something that is just... When you think of Dragon Age, you think of this.
The Darkspawn?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I do. I also think, just with everything we've learned in the Veilguard, Darkspawn are very topical right now. There's a lot of new Darkspawn types that we learned about. And so this episode is going to be focused on all the different kinds of Darkspawn. We're not going to go super in depth about here are all the new Darkspawn that we found in Veilguard. We're going to give like a little bit of an overview. And I should also mention, we're not going to be talking about special Darkspawn on this episode. That'll be a different episode. So like Corypheus and the Architect, that's going to be a different topic. Just because we'd be here for probably 3 hours if we wanted to talk about all of them too.
Yeah, definitely.
So are we ready to get into our fun facts for the day?
Of course.
All right. So first one is, according to the Codex, Genlock hands are almost twice the size of their feet.
I like it.
I don't know if that means their hands are abnormally large or their feet are abnormally small, but both seem odd to me. However, I will say, if you look at dwarves, and Genlocks come from dwarves, if you look at dwarves in Origins and 2 even, they are oddly shaped.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But also, I think with Genlocks, it depends on which model you're talking about. Because in Dragon Age Origins, they're kind of like little goblin-esque dwarfs or whatnot. And in Inquisition and 2, they're more kind of like hulking, like almost gorilla-esque.
You're right. They have changed every iteration of the games. So,
and we don't have them in Veilguard.
Correct. Okay, so my next fun fact is that shrieks, as they are commonly known and called and encountered in the games, are actually classified by scholars in Thedas as hurlocks.
Hurlocks. Like almost Sherlock.
I mean, sure. I just think they're trying to find another, like, okay, let me go with Hurlock. We've got Genlock. Let me try to figure out another one. And then Ogre can just be itself.
Right.
All right. So my last fun fact is that this is actually a Mass Effect crossover. And many of you, I'm sure, know this already. So it's probably not a surprise to many of our community. But you can find a statue of an ogre Darkspawn in Mass Effect 2 during Kasumi's mission.
Yes, one of the many crossovers between the two series.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say crossover as much as Easter eggs.
Yes.
But yes, for
Easter
sure.
eggs.
All right. So I think we're ready to kind of get into the lore of it all. But I did just want to give a basic shout out to our overview episode of the Darkspawn, everything you need to know about the Darkspawn. So if you haven't listened to that episode already, I would really recommend listening to that one before you listen to this one. So if you haven't, I would say press pause and go back, because we're going to build on some knowledge that we talked about in that previous episode. So because of that, we're not going to get into the big overviews of the Darkspawn. We're going to be instead discussing the standard types of Darkspawn. And like I mentioned earlier, this will not include special Darkspawn, but is really going to be focused on your standard hurlocks, whatever kinds of Darkspawn that you would find if you're just wandering through the deep roads.
Cool.
So let's get into hurlocks first. So, and you know, I should say, we don't know how much of this lore. Some of this lore is really old and some of the lore is really new. And if we ever do get any more Dragon Age, I'm not sure, some of this lore may be rewritten. So just keep that in mind. But for right now, for what we know, hurlocks are created from broodmothers who were once human. So they are the tallest and the most muscular of the Darkspawn, with the exception of ogres. And hurlocks are also the most effective at close combat, and you'll typically find them using two-handed weapons. They are also typically used in a Darkspawn army as like the shock troops, with a single hurlock being a match for several opponents. And also significantly with hurlocks, they are known to tattoo themselves, and they mark significant kills and just kind of things like that on themselves, which I found interesting.
Yeah, the shock troops is interesting because in later games, especially 2 and Inquisition, they are kind of like almost like fodder for that. Like you fight a bunch of them at once, and like especially Dragon Age 2, like it's all hurlocks. Like you're just fighting hurlocks all the time. I actually think that The Veilguard kind of goes back to this a little bit because the hurlocks are more like mini like commander boss enemies this time, and you have the ghouls as kind of the like horde thing.
Yes. Yeah, which I agree with you. I do think that's kind of a callback to the older lore because like during a blight, and the events of Veilguard are a blight, the hurlocks, at least the specifically the alphas, are often the commanders of specific units in the Darkspawn army. So that's significant. But I also think, moving into Genlocks a little bit, you know, Genlocks are actually technically the most common of all of the Darkspawn. And they are created from broodmothers who were once dwarves. So they're shorter, they're stockier, and they're, like I said, the most numerous. And I do think that makes sense because to me, a dwarven woman is the most likely to have been turned into a broodmother than any other race just because their proximity.
Exactly. I think that's probably true. And like how many Legion of the Dead members might get captured and done that, or how many just, you know, castless who get, I mean, Orzammar just exiles anyone who pisses them off into the Deep Rose.
True. Yes, absolutely. So more about Genlocks. They do have a penchant for using a hooked axe, and they do typically also use more complicated weapons compared to other species of Darkspawn. They also tend to employ traps, use sieges, and utilize terrain when attacking enemies. So they have this a little bit more strategic mind. And interestingly enough, Genlocks also have a higher magical resistance because they can shrug off spells. And the Ferelden Circle of Magi actually believed that this was due to the dwarven resistance to both lyrium and magic. Interestingly enough, however, Genlocks can become emissaries, while regular dwarves cannot wield magic.
I think that the Veilguard and its lore really explains this. I think in most retrospects, because if the blight is the disembodied angry dreams of the Titans, then that makes sense that it would connect a dwarf. And at Genlock, that was from a broodmother who was once a dwarf. Like the blight would connect them back to the Fade and back to the system of magic.
Right, and because blight is magical in nature, that's what gives them the magical powers, regardless of if they're being reconnected with those dreams or not.
Correct.
Okay, so let's get into shrieks, unless you had more to say about Genlocks. Nope. Okay, so shrieks or sharlocks are created from broodmothers who were once elven, so they are smaller, they're more lithe. Yes?
What does lithe mean?
Oh, it just means they're like flexible, like think of a dancer is very lithe. They have pointed ears, they're more agile, and they are also much more physically frail than any other species of Darkspawn. So they're easier to take down.
I disagree.
Okay. Well, technically, they do have the least health of all the Darkspawn. So
okay.
What do you think is the easiest Darkspawn to take down in a game?
Probably Genlock. Dragon Age Origin Genlocks.
I would say shrieks, just because the reason why you think shrieks are hard in combat is because they sneak up on you.
I guess that's true.
But anyway, that's a little off topic. But speaking of, shrieks do specialize in ambushing their prey and emitting ear-splitting cries in battle, which I'm sure we are all familiar with. Hence the nickname Shriek instead of their technical name of Sharlock. They are also extremely fast, and like I mentioned, they are the best at stealth of all the Darkspawn. Obviously, an ogre can't really be stealthy. And then they serve as the Darkspawn's best attempt at an assassin, able to sneak behind enemy lines and surprise you in combat. There have even been reports of shrieks creating and using poison made from their own blood during attacks.
Fancy.
Okay, do you have thoughts about shrieks? Because you really looked like you did.
I just take issue with it being easy to take down because I don't think they're easy to take down. But
I mean, I guess it depends on what difficulty you play on. So
I guess that's true. But yeah, I think shrieks kind of they disappeared from Dragon Age 2, which I guess we all just like kind of chalked up to it not being a blight. And then they came back in the Dragon Age Descent DLC. And then now we have them back in. They're not in the Veilguard again.
Right. I think there are a lot of similarities between Dragon Age 2 and the Veilguard. But anyway, I'm thinking about ogres. We have seen ogres in every single game.
Yes.
And we've seen hurlocks in every single game. So it really is just genlocks and shrieks that kind of get the shaft here.
I can't remember because you really only deal with the Darkspawn in 2 places outside of the Descent DLC. You deal with them in the Western Approach and in the Storm Coast. Yeah. I can't remember if you actually fight an ogre in any of those areas. I know you fight ogres in the Descent.
I don't remember.
But it would also make sense because even though Corypheus is Corypheus, like, he's not actively using Darkspawn as his army.
Well, no, it would get all of his human allies to desert him.
Right.
Okay. So are we ready to move on to ogres?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so ogres are created from broodmothers who were once Qunari. So they are the largest, the strongest, fastest of all the Darkspawn, though it is super interesting to me how a Qunari even came to be a broodmother. But we can talk about that at my last bullet point. So ogres also have a reputation for being much more cruel than the other Darkspawn species. And as you may know, they are also the most rare of all Darkspawn, with an estimated maximum of just 100 ogres accompanying the horde during a blight. They are even more uncommon in the deep roads when a blight is not currently occurring, which makes sense since the deep roads, the physical capability of an ogre getting through the deep roads is a bit limited. Like, yes, if the ogre stuck to just the areas that the dwarves had kind of colonized and built up, that would make sense. But as we know, there are so many crevices and cracks and crannies in the deep roads that the Darkspawn crawl through, and I don't see how an ogre would fit through that. So, all right. So the thing that's most notable to me about ogres is that they appeared during blights before the Qunari even arrived at Parvalin and on mainland Thedas. This is believed to be the result of a legendary colony of Kossith, the precursor race to the Qunari, who settled allegedly in the southern Korkari wilds.
It makes sense. But I also wonder, and I guess the Avar are humans. They're just tribes of humans.
Yeah.
They're just always bulkier than...
Not really, no.
The other Thedas humans. A lot of times, I feel
No,
like.
you just think that because all of the Avar clothing in the Jaws of Hakken DLC is like skin tight.
Oh, I guess that's true. All right. I was just trying to think of like if there's any other species that would cause that, but I guess Qunari are our only one.
I mean, there's no other species of like sentient people, at least as far as we currently know, on Thedas.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go to the mid-break then.
Uh-oh. The last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
So good, so good, so good. New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses. I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
I went to Kirkwall once. Yeah? Bit of a shithole. Yeah.
Well, tell me, have you ever licked a lamppost in winter?
What do you think rooks like in person? Do you think they smell nice?
What is wrong with you? And have you forgotten which side you're on?
No. I mean, think about if we could turn them. Riding beside a rook at the head of Devinter's vast armies.
I could stab them for you, on the house.
All right, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. Thank you so much to all of our patrons, and a special thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. We also have a new patron to thank, Giovanni C. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks and welcome to the Patreon. A special thank you to our Nug King tier patron, Lewis H., who gets thanked at every mid-break. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/DALorecast. You can sign up there at any tier. If you sign up at our First Enchanter tier, you can come on us with our monthly episodes of the show and talk about all things Dragon Age with us. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews wherever you can. With Spotify or Apple, leaving us comments. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read them out on a future episode of the show. All right, so I have a review today to read on our Dragon Age the Veilguard First Reaction episode. This comes from Simon, and they say, "Love this episode. It was nice to listen to people being excited about the Veilguard and having genuine critiques, but still bringing the buzz, especially when you open Twitter, puking emoji, and see a screaming contest about why you should hate the Veilguard. Thanks for this, guys." Yeah, thank you so much for that review. We are so glad that you enjoyed the Veilguard. It is a good game, and I'm happy to bring some positive light to that game. Lastly, join us on Discord. You can talk about Dragon Age, any game, the Veilguard, or the previous games. You can come and talk about any game you really want to. You can come hang out, share pictures of your pets and everything like that, all on our Discord, the Cubs Podcasting, and more. And with that, that's all I have for the middle of the show.
It's always a good time to celebrate your team. With designs for every occasion, Starbucks cards are the perfect thank you for employees and clients alike. Did you know that you can easily order gift cards in bulk directly from Starbucks at starbuckscardb2b.com? Give your team the recognition they deserve with a gift they're sure to use. They're thoughtful gifts for special occasions, events, or just because. With digital, physical, and customizable card options, gifting is made easy through starbuckscardb2b.com.
Don't Templars have anything better to do than come up with new ways to torment mages?
No.
Again, I'm so sorry Manfred keeps wandering in while you're asleep, Lucanus.
I think he wonders about spite.
Curiosity has feet.
We have enough feet already.
It has feet.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is
All right, so now we're going to talk about, we've talked about the species of Darkspawn, but now we're going to get into kind of their classes and some other things that can't really be classified. So let's start with emissaries, which I know we briefly did mention on our previous episode, but basically a Darkspawn emissary is a Darkspawn who has the ability to spellcast and use magic. Though their magic is not really the same as the magic you would find in just a regular everyday circle user. It would be more akin to blood magic than the regular magic that most Southern Thedosians use. And notably, as we mentioned before, all variants of Darkspawn can be emissaries, even Genlocks and ogres, though I don't think we've ever seen an ogre emissary before, which makes sense since there are so fewer of them. But most emissaries are also alphas. And alphas, if you remember, are the ones that like kill everyone in their like all of their siblings, so to speak. So they kind of rise above the others. They're stronger. They're usually bigger, usually smarter too. And also, something else that's interesting to me about emissaries is that emissaries rarely ever appear outside of a blight. And when they do, their purpose is to make sure that the generals and the commanders of the horde serve the archdemon's interests alone. They also serve as kind of shamans, spiritual leaders of the Darkspawn. Outside of special Darkspawn, emissaries are the only species of Darkspawn known to be able to speak and communicate outside of Darkspawn.
Interesting.
Yeah, so if you remember in the Return to Ostigard DLC, there is a Genlock emissary, I think, an emissary for sure, I know, that kind of taunts you and follows you around the battlefield while you're like looking for Duncan's stuff. And it says words to you. I'm not sure if we actually understand what it's saying, but like it speaks to you. It tries to taunt you. It lures you into a trap, which all of these track with both the behavior of Genlocks and the behavior of emissaries.
Yes, it very much does. I hate that little bitch.
Yeah, he's so rude. I also like headcanon that he's the one specifically that killed Duncan, even though we know that's not really true because we have the scene of Duncan dying because of the ogre. But I just feel like that Genlock emissary specifically was involved somehow because he's like so hell-bent on tormenting you.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Shelby has revenge out for this Genlock.
Oh, it's probably, I'm pretty sure you kill it in that DLC.
You do.
Anyway, so let's talk about alphas and omegas. Darkspawn alphas are very rare. They are those who fight against their own brood and destroy them all, rising to the top. And so they do become known as alphas, and they serve as the leaders and the commanders during a blight. They are, like I said, stronger physically than a normal Darkspawn, and they can exist for any subspecies of Darkspawn. So Genlock alphas, Hurlock alphas, Shriek alphas, Ogre alphas. I know we've seen Hurlock and Genlock alphas before, but I'm not sure we've ever seen Shriek or Ogre alphas. If you know of a situation where we have and we've just forgotten in the lore, please let me know.
I'm not sure. We do see an ogre. We do fight an ogre alpha in Dragon Age Inquisition in the Descent DLC.
Okay.
In that major like horde battle where you have to fight all the things that just keep coming and going. It doesn't fight any different than a regular ogre, but it is classified as a alpha.
I'm sure it just has more HP.
I'm sure it does too. The thing about that's interesting to me is, especially a change from Dragon Age Inquisition, is that emissaries in general, like in Dragon Age Origins, it's more like an emissary is just a subspecies of Darkspawn. Like any subspecies is an can be an emissary. So like emissary isn't its subspecies, it's almost like its class in Origins. And when we get to Inquisition, emissary is almost like a subspecies. They operate very similar to arcane horrors.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we're not going to talk about arcane horrors. We're not going to talk about revenants in this episode because they're not really technically Darkspawn. They're more demons. But let's move on to omegas a little bit, because omegas, and I just have really one thing to say because we've seen so few of these. An omega is an alpha who manages to slay another alpha. And we've only ever seen one of these before, and I believe that it was in Wynn's side quest in Origins. So we've only ever seen one omega. If I had done this research before Veilguard came out, I probably would have said, hey, I bet this is something they could bring into Veilguard. But I don't believe they did.
No, I think it's interesting. I think this kind of like lore is left over from Origins things that got put in there, and then they decided not to pursue it. But it makes, Alpha is beginning, first letter of the Greek alphabet, and Omega is end. So it makes sense.
It also just makes me wonder, like, are there ranks for all the other letters of the alphabet?
Who are the beta darkspawn?
Yeah, give me a beta darkspawn. That's who I want to fight. Are you kidding?
Gen Z is going crazy.
Yeah. Okay. So those are all the subspecies and the classes of darkspawn, and we do have a couple other. I hesitate to classify them really as darkspawn, because ghouls are people and creatures who have been infected with the taint, but I wouldn't say that they are true darkspawn, but I feel like we really have to talk about them in this episode.
They're a tainted creature.
Yeah, maybe that's a better title for this episode, types of tainted creatures. But so essentially a ghoul is a living creature that contracts the taint and manages to survive. Technically, all Grey Wardens are a type of ghoul. Now, humanoid ghouls who do not undergo the joining and become a Grey Warden develop a kind of blotchy, dark, and sallow tone to their skin as the taint progresses and gets more and more advanced. And in addition to these changes in their appearance, humanoid ghouls will also begin to hear the call of the archdemon, and they experience fever and itchiness, and basically that their body will become so degraded by the taint that they're misshapen. And they start to lose their hair. Their flesh also starts kind of like developing sores all over their body. And then eventually, as they get closer and closer into, becoming more and more like darkspawn, they lose their voice. Their voice will change into what actually the darkspawn sound like if they try to speak. And so then eventually they will not turn into a full darkspawn. They'll die of the taint corruption.
It's interesting with ghouls. I have a lot to say about ghouls, but it really relates to broodmothers, and I know we're going to talk about broodmothers specifically, so I want to kind of save that for just a lot, and it has to do with how different ghouls are in Dragon Age of the Veilguard, because ghouls in Dragon Age of the Veilguard are nothing like this.
Okay, we'll get there. So, female ghouls are typically taken by the darkspawn and made into broodmothers, which we'll talk about later. And I should also mention that Grey Wardens are able to survive ghoulhood basically because of the joining, but it really is less a survival and more just like a temporary reprieve or prolongment of survival, because the reality is that with age, the taint does turn the Grey Wardens into a fully fledged ghoul. We see that with Isaiah in the Last Flight book, and that's why the Grey Wardens... they go on their calling, as they start to hear the call of the archdemon more and more. So additionally, humans are not the only ones that can be turned into ghouls. Animals can also be tainted, but their changes are vastly, vastly different from the changes a humanoid experiences. They typically just become larger and much more aggressive. They don't seem to suffer as many, I don't want to say consequences as humanoids do, but it's almost like, I guess it's because animals they don't speak, they don't really have civilizations like humanoids do, so they don't necessarily have that kind of aspect to lose.
Right, and it's interesting because I think the real insight we get into this, obviously we see the blighted wolves and the bears, and I know we're going to talk about all of those, but we watch kind of what the joining does to griffins. And that's basically kind of the effect here, is that they go insane. They lose all sense of personality and agency and anything like that. And they become hyper aggressive. Yeah, they get the benefits of being stronger and
more powerful,
but they are hyper aggressive and,
can't be tamed.
Yeah. In Last Flight, the griffins, to a point that the griffins almost turn on the Grey Wardens.
Right, exactly it. And, we have seen actually quite a lot examples of animals that have been tainted. So we see Barascarn, which are actually bears. We've seen owls, wolves, even werewolves, crows, spiders, dragons, giants, and griffins. All have been tainted by the blight that we've seen in the game so far. And I'm sure there's more that I may have missed. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to some notable humanoid ghouls that we meet throughout the series. I know we also mentioned Isaiah, but there's also Bregan and Hespeth and Larius and Sophia Dryden and Utha and Tamlin and eventually Genevieve and pretty much also every Grey Warden we ever meet. So there are quite a lot of ghouls that we meet in the series.
Yeah, just ghouls are really, really interesting to me because I just have a lot of questions after the Veilguard about ghouls in general and like the nature of the creation of the Darkspawn. But yeah, I think this is an interesting aspect of like ghouls tend to be like less monstrous, but it's more of like a disease kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in like how this came about, especially since the Darkspawn weren't originally supposed to be kind of the big bad of Dragon Age.
Right.
So I wonder if like there was another like if ghouls were the original thing of like, oh, this is just a plague that goes in here and there's no sense of like Darkspawn.
It's absolutely possible. I really don't know the answer or if there is an answer. But I'm interested in your comments about Veilguard, so I want to move on to broodmothers. And you know, broodmothers are pretty
triggering?
Gross. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure most people have a baseline understanding of what it is, but basically they are giant tentacled ghouls. I don't necessarily think they're technically darkspawn, but they spawn vast numbers of darkspawn. So they are the mothers of the darkspawn, and they do this in a similar manner as like an insect would lay a clutch of their insect eggs. So even though they are technically ghouls, they are the only quote unquote female darkspawn. And in order to create a broodmother, a female is captured during a raid, force-fed darkspawn tissue, and the darkspawn, quote-unquote, spew into the prisoner's mouth. As this happens, they develop cannibalistic urges like every other ghoul does, and then they mutate heavily into the broodmother. Now, I should mention, in the lore where we learn about the force feeding of the darkspawn tissue and the darkspawn spewing, I feel like there is an underlying sexual component to this, but I also think you can kind of read this just in the plain language of it's just like they're force feeding tissue through the mouth and it's not sexual in nature. I think it's very ambiguous and there's not a clear answer on which way is the right interpretation.
I tend to agree with that. It's yucky either way.
One is unethical.
Yes.
The other one is just gross.
Right.
So not good either way.
Right. I mean, they are evil. Like Darkspawn are
of course.
evil. So like I get that, but yeah, I'm just gonna leave it up to interpretation and pretend that I'm gonna just leave it up for interpretation and not offer which one I think is intended by the author.
Sure. I mean, I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to fall on the side personally of reading this in more of the plain language. But I know that this kind of like ambiguous, like sexual horror, sexualized horror, I should say, was a lot more common when Dragon Age Origins came out than it is now.
Yes.
And so I think this is something they've intentionally moved away from because of that.
I do agree with that.
So just a couple more things about broodmothers. They do give birth to vast litters of darkspawn, estimated around 20 to 50 at one time, which is significant. Like, you know, obviously in humans, we can have one birth, we can have really up to triplets is fairly common. Anything more than that is pretty unusual. And whereas with dogs and other mammals in our world, like, yeah, okay, it's common to have 4, 5, 6, 8 puppies in a litter. But 20 to 50 in a litter is insane. Like,
it is a lot.
That is not very common. And I should also mention that Darkspawn babies are not infants as we know them to be. Rather, they emerge as like a horse, another baby animal would, already able to walk, already able to survive in the wild, and growing very, very rapidly in the first weeks of life. You know, when a human baby is born, they are 100% dependent on the mom and dad for everything they need. An animal in the wild, like if you watch a horse, a zebra, any kind of mammal, I should say, born, they are completely able to fend for themselves pretty much from the get-go. They still need care and to be taught by their parent, but they're able to survive. They're more fragile, they're more at risk, but they are able to survive for themselves. Now, I think some other species like birds and reptiles are a little bit more fragile, I should say, but for all intents and purposes, Darkspawn are more animal-like when they are born, fully ready to go. And just the last thing I have to say about broodmothers is that one broodmother will birth thousands of young in her lifetime. So even if, going back to the ogres and the Kunari, even if a Kossith broodmother was created, she could live hundreds probably of years and birth these thousands of ogres over her lifetime.
Yeah.
Until the Kunari land on mainland Thedas and the Darkspawn can get another one.
My whole thing with broodmothers really relates, and it relates back to the Veilguard, relates to the fact that we watch Gillenane create Darkspawn basically out of nothing. She just manipulates the blight and creates that. So my question is are broodmothers and ghouls as we know them, like the ghouls we see in the Veilguard, are more like spontaneous Darkspawn creations that Gillenane creates, whereas ghouls and taint and the taint going in there, could that have been something that Gillenane whispered to the Darkspawn through the calling to, like, oh, go create broodmothers so you can continue existing?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, actually, because I feel like before the Avenurus got locked away, Gillenane was kind of the one that created all of them, and that when she got locked away, she wasn't able to do that anymore, and so she had to tell them, give them a way to sustain themselves, to sustain their population. And broodmothers was her solution. And I do feel like we see some of the elements of a broodmother in Gillenane. I mean, we see the tentacle stuff, like she's very tentacle-ish, and so are they. And we also know in the Horror of Hormak chapter, there's a lot of tentacle stuff there too. So I feel like this is an idea she maybe already had and worked on it, maybe in Hormak, maybe elsewhere, and gave it to the Darkspawn after she was locked away.
Right. And like the Gillenane, the manipulation of like kind of creation in the way that Gillenane does it with the Darkspawn really, I think, meshes well with the Chantry lore about like spirits being unable to create, or like perversions of creation and things like that. I think that meshes well with the established Chantry lore. And I do think that broodmothers, at least, like, and maybe modern day ghouls, not the ones we see in Veilguard, but the ones from that we know and we see, because we see people get tainted and wrapped up, like there's the elves in Demetus Crossing and other things that we see, like, okay, yeah, you've been ghouled. And I would say even, you know, whichever party member, whether it's Nev or Balara, like, I would say they're on the verge of being a ghoul at that point.
Yes.
And obviously Isaiah and
I would say, I don't know, Isaiah is kind of her own thing. I don't think we've ever seen any character who the taint has progressed so far in them.
Correct.
Other than Isaiah.
Other than the Magisters, but I feel like you said that they're different.
Yeah,
they're a different breed.
Yeah, I exclude them completely from that narrative. But I do agree with you. I think that the ghouls in the Veilguard are different because the taint is able to be reversed in them. Like whoever, you have Balara or Nev that gets all the stuff on them. I don't even know what the right word is. Like it gets reversed or it can be reversed. And so I'm just kind of like, is this because the Ebenuris have their powers back and they're able to kind of manipulate the blight more than we would have without them? Or is there another explanation for this? Or is the taint really that different? I don't know if we know the answer to that.
Right. I am laughing though really, really hard because, the hero Ferelden allegedly has been looking for a cure for the calling all the way. And then here comes Rook that just
falls into it.
No, just kills all of the elven gods. And it's like that thing of like the hero Ferelden going back and just be like, hey, remember how I was looking for this thing? Well, I've got good news and I've got bad news.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think Rook just kind of like falls into the situation without having done the work. And if I was the hero of Ferelden, I would be so pissed off at them.
Right. Like I've been
out here for 20 years and you're some fresh kid. You're just going to come up and figure it all out without me. Yeah. Okay. Well, do you have other thoughts about any other types of Darkspawn before we get into our side character?
I don't think so. Just that I think that the Veilguard makes things interesting. But I do think that like a way to explain this would be that like Gillenane develops the broodmothers as like an evolution of what her original process was. Something that wouldn't require her to manipulate the taint. And
yeah,
because I mean, at the truth, like she's a scientist, she's an experiment. She wants to take things to their ultimate end.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely correct. All right, well, let's get into our side character because today's side character is a man with the mustache to end all mustaches, Jean-Marc Stroud. We first meet him in DA2, and he also conditionally appears in Inquisition. And he is a senior Orlesian Grey Warden. So let's get into his backstory a little bit. He was born the younger son of a minor noble family in Ghislaine, Orlais. After finishing training with the Chevalier, he received word that his family had been killed. It was made to look like they were killed by bandits, but in reality, they were pawns and victims in the grand game of Orlais, which is pretty standard. Stroud sought revenge, but before he could do so, his trainers at the academy encouraged Warden Commander Clorel to recruit him so that he wouldn't throw his life away in seeking this revenge. She did so, and of course, Stroud, as a very honorable Chevalier, could not refuse her. So he joins the Wardens. And he served the Wardens with honor in the following decades, even earning a reputation as the best swordsman in the order due to primarily his Chevalier training. He was also tasked with training and recruiting new Wardens, and many of them attribute their skills to his remarkable training. So that's pretty much all we know of his backstory. Let's get into Dragon Age 2, where you can first meet Stroud in 2 after returning to the surface during the Deep Roads expedition. If your sibling goes and contracts the taint, Anders will suggest searching for a warden. That warden is Stroud, and he will help Hawk's sibling. And if Alistair did not stay with the Wardens, you can meet Stroud again during the first Battle of Kirkwall. Hawk stumbles upon him in Lowtown fighting a group of Qunari, in which he gives Hawk a ring. Now, moving on to Dragon Age Inquisition, where if Alistair and Loghain are dead / not wardens, Stroud is the warden that Hawk will contact for help to investigate Red Lyrium. He has now gone into hiding due to corruption in the Wardens. This corruption, as we know from our previous episode, is brought on by Clorel, who was Stroud's recruiter and mentor. I can imagine that this situation must be doubly painful for him specifically compared to Logain or Alistair, since Clarel is the one who recruited and mentored him for all these years. So I do feel for Stroud in this. But he will come along you to fight at Adamant Fortress. And when you go to the Fade, you can choose to leave him or Hawk in the Fade, as we all know. And if Stroud survives the Fade, which I don't think has ever happened ever, he will take command of any surviving wardens and will travel to Weishaupt to brief the warden leadership of what's transpired. So I would imagine by the time of Veilguard, when Weishaupt, pretty much gets wiped off the map, Stroud probably dies in that battle, if I had to guess. But we don't have confirmation of that.
Right.
And that's pretty much all we know about him.
Yeah, he definitely does have the mustache to end all mustaches. Mustache for days for Stroud. I think Stroud takes a lot of I don't think anyone really hates Stroud, but it's just at the point of he kind of ends up being the sacrificial lamb because he's not the player character that we all created and fell in love with.
Yep. Well, and I also think, when you put Stroud versus Hawk, in the Fade, obviously we're going to pick Stroud over Hawk, always. I think about the other warden options in that mission, and the only one that's hard for me is Alistair versus Hawk. Logain, love the ending with Logain in the Fade. That shit is immaculate. Perfect ending for him. But yeah, with Alistair Hawk, that's the only one that's a hard choice for me. When I played this game for the first time, Stroud was my warden, and because Alistair was king, and so I didn't have any problems leaving him in the Fade. And I'm sorry to this man. I don't dislike you, like you just said. But when it's compared with somebody we know and love as much as Hawk, yeah, I'm going to leave the warden in the Fade because you have signed up to protect Thedas. You have signed up to kind of fight against Darkspawn and give up your life if needed to. Hawk, while they are a champion of Kirkwall and would do that, they're not part of an order that has dedicated themselves to and given oaths to that mission.
I agree. And especially with Logain, but I know that's not a Logain thing. I think it would be really hard. Stroud for me would win out on I would keep him if it was Stroud versus Logain. If it was two wardens.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because I agree with you that if the hero of Riverdane is going to have to go out fighting, I would rather him go out fighting against doing what he does best, which is fighting insurmountable odds.
That's such a good point. Yes, I agree with that wholly. And I'm sure if you leave Logain in the Fade, he has wiped a section clean. He's probably built a little house for himself.
And he's probably grumpy about it.
He's probably pissed off at everybody around him, but he has made it work. That is what I fully believe. And one day he's going to go out fighting, but until then he's going to make it work, and only the best way that Logain can. But back to Stroud for a little bit. I do like Stroud. I wish we got more of him. I wish we knew more about him. And I also specifically wish we got more between Stroud and Clarel specifically, because that interplay between the any of the warden options, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for Alistair or Logain to be in hiding, in my opinion. What do you have to hide from Warden Commander Clarel? She can't do anything to you. In Ferelden, that's a different order of wardens. So what can she really do to you? And not to mention that, but Alistair, you're a Theron. You could have been king. Logain, you were the right hand of the king. You were Anora's regent. What can she do to you?
Do you really think and this is the you bring up a great point here, because at least Stroud is Orlesian. And so it makes sense that he is subservient to Corel. But do you think the first warden would authorize the Orlesian warden commander kidnapping or basically imprisoning a Theron or a Mactier, and Ferelden is going to sit there and
sit silently by?
Sure, whatever.
I know.
Think Eamon Garen is going to sit there with Alistair imprisoned, or even Loghain, and just be like, yeah, we can let this slide.
I do wonder, though, if they would even know, because the whole thing is that she's doing all this in secret, and she's imprisoning and taking out any warden that kind of stands against her plan to ally with Corypheus. So I have to wonder, like, how much of it is she keeping secret? But just back to the point, like, Stroud's story is the only one that really makes sense with that overarching narrative of Clorel, like, trying to hunt down dissenting senior wardens, because they see through her bullshit. Basically, they see through the manipulation that she's under and is trying to do to others.
Right.
And I just wish we got more of that relationship between the two of them, between Stroud and Clorel, just because they clearly have so much history together. I want to know more about how all this transpired, how everything went down.
Right. I agree. And like from a other kind of point in there, it also makes me think that like Alistair is king, Loghain dead is
canon.
Is kind of like BioWare's established canon.
I mean, I think
game.
it is. I do think it is.
Whether or not Honora is, because there are ways, like if you, the warden, kill Loghain, you can still have Alistair and Honora be together.
Yes, I believe so. I don't remember. But anyway, unless you have anything else to add about Stroud, I think we can wrap it up.
All right, well, let's wrap it up.
That's your job.
That's me job. Anyway, so yeah, we can wrap it up. Before we go, I do want to give a special thank you to our Nug King patron, Lewis H., who gets thanked at the end of every episode. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for all of you who listen to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Ever wanted to be a content creator but had no clue where to begin? Come join me as I sit down with content creators that have already faced the challenges you're up against, as they discuss the tips and tricks that help them be successful. Here on The Content Creator's Guide, available wherever podcasts can be found.